AgriFutures acknowledges the First Nations people of Australia as traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we live, learn and work. We pay our respects to past, present and future elders of these nations and any First Nations people on this webinar today. A little bit of housekeeping for everyone. We'll be recording today's session and making that available to everyone next week. Throughout the webinar, as a courtesy to the presenters, we've asked that you please keep your video on and your audio on mute. For Q&A, please use the chat function and ask us all questions over the course of the webinar, and these will be addressed in the Q&A time. So as a wrap up to the National Industrial Variety Trials project, I'd like to make some acknowledgements. Firstly, to Mark Skews as the project coordinator, to the trial site managers, Guy Roth, Shah Nawaz, Shahar Jahan Mian, Ed Kaplan, Drew Portman, Ed Wando, Penny Rifkin, Reese Flynn, Jason Flinch and Amanda Pearce. Our funding partners, Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries of the Northern Territory Government, West Australian Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development, South Australian Department of Primary Industries and Regions, Agriculture Victoria, Department of Natural Resources and Environment Tasmania, University of Sydney, South Australian Research and Development Institute. Also like to acknowledge the seed suppliers, Ananda Foods, Hepburn Ag, Hemp Farms Australia, Hemp Grow, Leawood Hemp, Midland Seed, the Hemp Co. Straight Line Farming. John Muir, who provided agronomic advice as the IHVT agronomist, and Andrew Van Bugle, who provided statistical analysis support to the program. And that's enough from me. And now I'd like to hand over to Mark Skews to provide a wrap up of the program as the coordinator. Over to you, Mark.
You're on mute, Mark. You're on mute, Mark.
All right, sorry about that. I'll get back into it now. So I'm going to provide some background to the trials and run through the results and some recommendations that came from the work. So firstly, where were the trial sites? There were 3 climatic zones identified for trial site locations: a northern climatic zone, a central and a southern. And we had 9 trial sites in all spread through those 3 climatic zones. Couple of notes on here: the trials were done as summer or dry season crops, and so they were irrigated crops. The sowing times in the tropics or the northern climatic zone were April, May, June in the dry season or leading into the dry season. And in the central and southern zones, November and December were the primary sowing times leading into a summer growing season. And you can see there the 9 trial sites. And here we have just a list of those. The range of latitudes, so you can see the range of where those sites were located, and also the site managers. And Kelly's already thanked those site managers, but I add my thanks to that, to Kelly's. In terms of varieties in the trial sites, we sought to have varieties from all over the world as far as possible. So we had varieties that came from Australia, Canada, China, France, Poland, and one very late entry from South Africa. And the idea was to try and get varieties from all over the world and from different latitudes and locations and climatic zones to see how they would perform across Australia. Within those varieties, we had a range of sex expressions. So we had 9 of the 22 varieties were monoecious, 13 were dioecious, 5 of them were specific grain varieties, and 17 of them were classified as dual purpose. So able to be used for grain production, but also for biomass or fibre and herd production. So that's a very quick rundown on the program and the methodology used. We'll jump into some results quickly. Firstly, THC levels. I'm sure you are all aware that industrial hemp across Australia has a upper limit of 1% THC. We can see here that varieties fell into a few different categories. These are the highest THCs recorded during the trials. And all of the French varieties fell into the lowest category there of less than 0.1%. And a couple of the Australian varieties. We had other varieties that gave us results higher than that, but less than 0.5%. And the key there is that any seed that's going to be sown for a crop to grow a crop in most jurisdictions in Australia must come from parent plants that were less than 0.5% THC. So when we get into that category with Harnene, King G and Ruby, where the THC is greater than 0.5 but less than 1%, those are able to be grown as industrial hemp crops, but they can't, from those particular sites where the THC was higher than 0.5%, you would not be able to retain that seed for later sowing. Victory Monster, which was a late variety, came from South Africa, was only planted at one site in one sowing, but it exceeded the 1% THC level, and as a result was actually that the trial plots were destroyed by the Western Australian Department under their legislation. And that is, in our case, that was a pity, and we were unable to take that through to yield. In the case of a commercial grower, that would be quite a disaster with the cost of seed and irrigation and fertiliser put into that crop to have it destroyed. So that is something that needs to be borne in mind. It's worth noting that the varieties that fell into the 0.5 to 1%, there is variation between sites, between seasons, and so there can be concern that those varieties, if reused, could exceed 1%. And we've had, we haven't had any of that during the IHVT, but it's something to bear in mind. So the lower the THC, the better from that respect. I want to present some of the results in graphs, and so I'll explain this graph so that the subsequent graphs make sense. Across the x-axis at the bottom, we have latitude. So the Catherine and Kununurra, the tropical sites, are to the left, and as you go further south, the sites are to the right. And on the y-axis up the side is, in this case, a measure of season length, or days from planting to harvest. And a number of varieties, not all of the 22 varieties, but varieties that were trialled at most or all trial sites have been included here, and some trend lines drawn. What I draw your attention to particularly is the difference in groupings here in the patterns. So the Chinese varieties, in the case of season length, have generally had longer season length than most of the European and Canadian varieties, which are down the bottom, and Ruby, which is an Australian variety, is kind of sitting in between. The other thing is there is a difference in the way those varieties have responded with latitude. So the difference in season length in the tropics is actually not huge. At Kununurra, maybe 65 days to less than 120 days. At Catherine, 80 to 110, 105 days. So not a large difference in the season length. As you go further south, that difference is much more amplified. And so the Chinese varieties are running much longer, up to 180 plus days season length, whereas some of the European varieties are still around the 60, 70, 80 day mark. So there's much more variation as you go south. That has implications as you then look at other factors. So if we look at plant height, there's a similar pattern. So as you go south, the variation increases. The Chinese varieties are generally taller, so longer season length, more growing time, more vegetative growing time. The European and Canadian varieties are shorter with shorter season length. But again, as you go south, they actually are growing taller. And Ruby is sitting in the middle again. Dry matter yield somewhat follows that trend. Again, it's low dry matter yields in the tropics for all varieties. The Chinese varieties are producing more dry matter than the European varieties. But the largest dry matter production figures are coming from sort of the mid-latitudes and Manjimup, Loxton sites. And then as you go south, that tends to drop off again. And the Chinese varieties are producing a lot of biomass at some sites, but quite less biomass at other sites. Noting that the Chinese varieties were not trialled at Epping Forest in Tasmania, the southernmost site. Grain yield is quite a different pattern, however. So in the tropics, despite not growing a lot of biomass, the Chinese varieties grow a lot of seed. The European varieties don't perform well for grain production in the tropics, but the situation is quite the reverse as you go south. So once you get to the southern sites, Myope, Hamilton, Epping Forest, it's the European varieties and Canadian varieties that are producing the high seed, high grain yields, and the Chinese varieties are not producing grain, a lot of grain at those sites. If we look at grain quality, 1,000 grain weight, the pattern here is generally that the Chinese varieties produce large grains, and the rest of the varieties trialled, there's a range in there, but they're all less than the Chinese varieties, which is interesting. And that's definitely a genetic effect. But there is also an environment effect there where the Chinese varieties are producing larger grain at the extremes in the north and in the south, more so than at sites like Stanthorpe and Narrabri. Oil content is another measure of grain quality. Less separation between the different varieties, but Hanola has consistently produced low oil content. And that's been a fairly consistent thing, not only across the sites, but also between seasons. Otherwise, there's a bit of variation there. There's some effect of latitude, but much less extreme differences. From that work and the results that we found and other observations during the trials, there are a few recommendations that have come from that work. In terms of varieties for particular sites, It's a quite complex which varieties are best suited for particular latitudes and sites across the trials. So there are different varieties recommended for each location, and the best thing to do is to go and look at the final reports for each of the sites, which are available on the AgriFutures Knowledge Hub website, and also the overall IHVT final report is there and has those recommendations as well. So have a look at those if you want more detail on which varieties are best for your area. In terms of sowing times, there was not a lot of, at most sites, there wasn't a lot of difference between the sowing times that were trialled. So at Catherine, April or May were quite suitable sowing times. And in most of the southern sites, November or December were quite suitable. There were some variety-dependent responses, particularly at Kununurra, Myote and Hamilton. So again, have a look at the reports for those trial sites if they're relevant to you. And then Epping Forest, the later the December sowing time didn't perform as well as November. So November is recommended as a sowing time for Epping Forest in Tasmania. There were a number of challenges that were encountered throughout the program, and seed supply and the quality of seed was a key major issue throughout the trials. A lot of the seed was imported as it came from, the overseas varieties were imported, generally speaking, and this really increased the risk of delays. And in some cases, seed just never made it through quarantine for various reasons. Those delays and also in some cases poor handling of the seed during that quarantine period led to some low germinations, very low germinations for some of the seed that was received. And generally the germination rates were not ideal. So that was a challenge, meant using a lot more seed to get enough plants to emerge and establish. So there is a real need to take care with storage, handling and transport of hemp seed. It's not robust and it needs care. And a general recommendation would be to test germination before sowing. So however good the seed might have been when it left the supplier, test it before you sow to see what's happened during transport and your own storage as well. Seedling establishment can be a challenge, and one thing we discovered was that low germination rates are also associated with poor seedling vigour. So even if seed does germinate, often the seedlings that germinate from that seed are poor. They have low vigour and they don't thrive well. Other causes of poor establishment include burial of seeds by sand drift. So hemp seed generally is sown quite shallow. It needs to be able to get out and access the sunshine pretty quickly. So if the sand drift and you fill up the furrows from sowing, that can lead to real issues with emergence and establishment. Poor drainage, soil compaction, high soil temperatures were also issues that were encountered along the way. So additional recommendations for growers. Definitely need to consider existing crop rotations when considering industrial hemp on a property, and how is that going to fit into what's currently on the property and the rotations. That's where season length and planting time information is critical. Is your soil suitable? What's the salinity like? Is there compaction? Is it well drained? What's the water supply like for irrigation? Do you have enough? What's the salinity levels? Pest and weed control are big issues for industrial hemp because there are very, very few chemicals that are registered for hemp. Mostly you're relying on APVMA permits, and they lapse after a time and may or may not be renewed. So that limits the chemicals that are available for use on hemp. And I'd direct growers to, potential growers to the best management practice document that's on the AgriFutures Australia Knowledge Hub website. That's an excellent resource. Recommendations for industry. Developing a seed certification scheme is a high priority so that growers can have confidence in the seed that they are receiving. Seed storage, transport and handling protocols are critical. Most of that information is available, but putting it together and distributing it to the industry is key. Working with governments towards consistent and clear regulations. So at the moment, there are some variability between states, and that can be a challenge when you're trying to work across state borders. Support and resourcing for Australian breeding and selection programs would be a really good development for the industry, and developing Australian-based seed multiplication capacity so that we don't rely on importing seed every year for sowing. Finally, future research recommendations. Local breeding and selection is important and should be encouraged. Generate local variety passport data. So some of the information that we received about the varieties for the IHVT were proved not to be very accurate in Australia. So generating local information that's relevant locally is important. Alternative sowing times and understanding the photoperiodicity of varieties, how they respond to day length is important. Investigating dryland production systems. Integrated pest management options for hemp would be really a useful thing to investigate. And research to support chemical registrations for hemp so that we're not relying on APVM permits and getting some registrations that will be long lasting. Okay, thank you for listening to me, and I'll hand back to Kelly.
Thanks very much, Mark. I've just been having a look at some of the questions. It looks like a lot of them have been answered in chat. I'll address them to you, Mark, and then we'll go from there. Was any data captured on the Victory Monster variety?
There was information captured on the seasonality of that variety, so the season length, the sort of general vegetative performance of that variety, but it wasn't taken through to harvest. It was tested for THC at female flowering and destroyed at that point. So anything beyond sort of female flowering heights, I believe that sex expression would have been assessed, but that's probably about it.
Okay. I think everyone's answered that in the chat, but just to you, Mark, on whether the seeds are tested for THC before planting.
So the parent plants were all tested, and we received certificates for most of the seed that came in, identifying the THC level of the parent plants. But obviously, with a Victory Monster, I'm not really sure how accurate that information was that we received.
Right, the next one, I'll just reframe that question a little bit, but based on the results of these trials, does it appear that several of these varieties are fundamentally unsuitable for southern regions because of the photoperiod-induced stress leading to delayed maturity and THC elevation?
So, yeah, look, again, I direct people to the individual site reports, but certainly, there is a lot of variability in performance across latitudes of different varieties, and so yes, there are some varieties that are not going to be suitable in some areas, those same varieties will do well in other areas. So really selecting the varieties for the region that you're growing in is critical.
Fantastic. Next one, do we have the CRCP hemp biomass quality results from Melbourne Uni?
I haven't seen those.
Okay. Can we assume many of the varieties do not have PBR?
I would recommend assume nothing, unless you know that a variety is a public variety. I think assume that it has some level of PBR, I'm not sure what the intent of that question is, I wouldn't. If that's something that you're interested in, I think you need to talk to the suppliers of that variety and clarify that.
Okay, fantastic. For Victory Monster, how long was the cycle until it breached and what height?
That information I don't have, but I believe that information is in the Kununurra final report, and there will be some information in the IHVT final report.
Fantastic. What data has been captured about the soil quality variations for each site?
So at each site there was some soil information collected, more at some sites than others, but the soils were characterised at each site, and again that information will be in the reports.
Fantastic. So I'll just note to anyone, if there are any questions that you still have that you want to sort of send through, just direct them to my email, and we'll maybe publish a Q&A or something, or I can address your questions. So just flick anything through to me that wasn't sort of answered in this session. And I might now hand over to Drew Port, who is going to talk to us about the next phase of work that we'll be doing under the Industrial Hemp Program of Research. So if you're ready now, Drew, I will hand over to you.
No worries. Thanks for that, Kelly. Yeah, we'll just go through it. Mark, thanks, Mark. So welcome, everybody. So basically, the IHVT laid the foundation for characterising hemp varieties in Australia, and our goal moving forward is to ensure an ongoing supply of improved germplasm and provide growers with clear guidance on varietal selection for different environments and end use. Next slide, please. So as part of this transmission, the IHVT program contributed by being run between 2021 and 2024 across 9 trial sites, which Mark's already detailed, and basically testing around 23 varieties from countries including China, Canada, France, Poland, South Africa and Australia. And its objectives were to evaluate grain and dual purpose varieties, generate locally relevant agronomic data, and provide key outputs including performance by latitude, optimal sowing windows, and also THC compliance and recommendations for growers and industry, which is some of the things that Mark's already outlined in his last presentation. Next slide. So building on the Industrial Hemp Variety Trial, the Australian Industrial Hemp Program of Research, or AIHPR, was created, and this is being managed by Southern Cross University, and it's got a focus on the 3 trial sites, at least in theme 1, representing the 3 agronomical zones, which are Katherine in the Northern Territory, Hamilton in Victoria, and Narrabri in New South Wales. Next slide, please. So the Industrial Hemp Program of Research is a 5-year program. It's valued at $2.5 million, and it's guided by the National R&D and E plan and supported by strong governance. It's structured around 4 themes, and this is where we get to the really important objectives. So theme 1, which is led by DAF-NT, is all about seed and varieties. Theme 2 is led by Sarah Purdy at New South Wales DPI, and it's investigating the agronomical aspects of hemp varieties, particularly nitrogen response, sowing rate, and disease pathology throughout trials across 3 locations. Theme 3 is led by Ken Dodds at Charles Sturt University, and he's looking into hemp product production, but particularly around livestock feed and other veterinary products for animals. And finally, theme 4 is led by Mari Chantel at SCU, and she's addressing the sustainability aspects of hemp production in Australia and the economic impacts. Next slide, please. So I'm going to focus in on theme 1 now, which is the theme I'm responsible for, and I guess the one I have my head around the most at this point in time. So really, theme 1 aims to prioritise traits and develop product profiles, formulate phenotyping guidelines, and test high priority varieties for yield, oil, protein, and fibre, and build an industry-facing varietal selection database. Next slide. So far, the theme 1 trials have begun, and in Narrabri, we've sown our first 2 times of sowing, which occurred in October and November. There'll also be a 3rd time of sowing in March, and the Hamilton trials are just about to kick off, which will be sown late November and early March. Katherine trials will not happen until around April next year, 2026. Next slide, please. So this is really how the Industrial Hemp Variety Trials influenced the new Australian Industrial Hemp Program Research Trials, and this is the really important information data we gleaned from that. So you can see that the table we have here on the slide has the IHVT recommended varieties for each area, Katherine, Narrabri, and Hamilton. And you can see the current selection that we've made for the trials this year, this season, at both Katherine, Narrabri, and also Hamilton. And it's also represented on the map on the right-hand side. So what we actually did was we rated the performance of these particular varieties at each site throughout the IHVT, and they were our top selections moving forward into the AIHPR. Unfortunately, as Mark's already talked about, seed acquisition is a bit of a struggle when it comes to hemp at the moment. So we weren't always able to get the varieties that perform best in the IHVT into the AIHPR. But that doesn't matter. We managed to get some varieties in each site that were a carryover. But interestingly enough, we've started to have new varieties or superseded varieties come in to the trial. And I guess what we're really looking at now, which is something that Mark's touched on before, is bringing in new Australian varieties into the AIHPR during the 3-year process of field trials. I don't want to disclose any information I shouldn't, but we've talked to several people who are breeding in Australia where all we're waiting is for their PBR to come through, and they're very keen to have their particular varieties within our trial sites. Next slide, please. So what does all this mean and the way forward? So in the short term, we're going to complete the sowing and data collection. In the medium term, our goals include publishing product profiles, which we've already done to a certain extent. And we're going to be looking at launching a varietal database and engaging growers and being able to really guide growers down that pathway to what varieties are going to work best in their areas, but also related to what they want to grow for, whether they want to grow for grain or whether they want to grow for fibre. I'm going to ad lib a bit here. I'd love to see another project after this, if it can't be included in this, where we actually start to work a lot more closely with new growers, even if it was from an area of assisting them with licensing and maybe participating in seed bulk up of Australian varieties. But that's pretty much a long-term strategy. But at the end of the day, we hope to integrate the findings of this project into the National Hemp R&D strategy to support breeding programs and position hemp as a sustainable rotation crop within Australia. And I see personally particular value for hemp in a place like the Northern Territory, where we struggle to grow traditional cereal crops. And growers up here are always on the search for what's going to grow well in the NT. And I think that personally, hemp as a fibre crop is an exciting crop that would parallel very nicely with our dryland cotton. Next slide. So I'd just like to thank all the participants that were involved in the original project and those people that are moving forward, Charles Sturt University, Department of Primary Industries and Southern Cross University, as well as AgriFutures. And look, I look forward to working with everybody. I know there's some very passionate people within the hemp fraternity, and I actually really enjoy that. And I really hope moving forward that we can have some more things like this and maybe some agronomy training sessions where we can all get together and really nut it out and continue this work into trying to get a hemp industry established in Australia for our growers. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Drew. I'm just having a look through the questions here. There's a question there about funds distribution and things like that. Unfortunately, no, that information is confidential to the program. I'm just having a look here at, I believe it was you, Rob Eccles, who made some comments around latitudes. Would you like to jump in and make some comments, Rob?
Yeah, sure. So there's breeders here that know better than me, but certainly once you get north of the New South Wales border, varieties start behaving differently, and they're all a bit different. So as you go further north, they'll get triggered to flower, not so much relying on declining day length trigger. It'll be more growing degree days, heat units and the old terminology. And we've got a huge gap there between New South Wales border and Catherine and Darwin and the Ord and Cairns and Drew. I know we talked about this 3 weeks ago. So what, when, where, and what purpose you're sowing for? There's nothing for us out of both this one going ahead and the one in the past.
Sorry, you've just gone on to mute.
Obviously, someone didn't want to hear me, Drew.
Yeah, sorry, mate.
So we're still in the dark because the original variety trials, we didn't sow anything after December, and a lot of grain crops are growing. Sown, January, February, March, April, before even getting to the true tropics. So there's a lot of land mass that we're missing out on. And Drew, I know I'm not saying it's your fault, but I mean we really have missed a big gap in Australia. It's half the Australian latitude we've missed out on both times so far, and unfortunately I'm in the middle of it, and most people I deal with are further north of there. So just a comment, I guess. Don't want to sound too negative. At least we're doing something.
No, I don't think it's negative. I encourage all this type of discussion, and also remembering that I'm sort of relatively new to hemp. So I would be really interested in what you think, if we can't answer that in this project, how that question should be answered. Is it by having trials in those regions? What's the easiest way, or what is the industry looking for in answering that question?
Yeah, it's a good question, Drew. I mean, there's some plant breeders would know better than me, but I mean, you got organisations, you got Wandara in this zone. You've got someone wants to build 100 hemp houses growing in this zone. So there's a lot of activity here, and everybody would know if you have crop failures when you're trying to set up a supply chain, you're pretty doomed. Look at the people that are no longer with us, not died, but they're no longer with us business-wise because they couldn't manage that or couldn't get the right information. So what, when, where? So, or partly that anyway.
I really like that acronym. Is it possible that the actual information is out there, we just don't know it?
Well,
there's a disconnect between growers and seed companies and
and also a lot of this is IP, so and a lot of them, so there's people listening or will look at this recording that would know, and that's their IP, and also a lot of people importing varieties won't know. They won't know, and a lot of varieties are coming from higher latitudes, and declining day length is the trigger. But I see some of the varieties when you go north, they're almost auto flowering. Like you enjoy with cotton and corn and other veggie crops mostly these days. So you wouldn't dream of planting November, December in these environments. And there's an April, May window, but we get great results sown in end of winter and September. Anyway, I know I've said enough.
Okay, no problems. I noticed Colin's got his hand up there. Colin, would you?
Yep, I hope you can hear me now. The issue that we've got is record keeping from people that are trialling hemp crops. So when I first started importing hemp seed, I put out a data sheet for people to collect, and I sold seed, and I send that data to everybody to collect that information. Only one person in all of Australia has ever filled in that sheet. And then people wonder why we don't know what we're doing, because this is a wild plant that a lot of cloudy days in a row will change the flowering date. As Rob said, when you go further north, the same variety planted in Victoria, of a Chinese variety, will grow to 5 to 6 metres tall. But you go and plant it up in the north, and you'll get seed off it at 1.5 metres tall. So it's understanding and talking to the people that you're buying your seed from. And now people talk about a lack of seed supply in Australia. There is seed growers and seed suppliers in Australia that have not put any of their varieties into these trials, but that is their prerogative not to do, because it's their business. It's the way they run it. Bob Doyle and I tried to bulk up seed back 7 years ago, Chinese seed. We grew 4 or 5 tonne. It took us 2.5 years to sell the last of that, and the last of it we threw out because no one wanted it. Our industry will not have a guaranteed seed supply until the industry is mature enough to be growing 4,000 and 5,000 hectares. Otherwise, we're going to struggle, because it's costly to grow hemp seed. It's costly to store it, because it's very difficult to store. So there's a lot of issues around it, but it's about getting an end market so we can supply into. And that's what it's all. To grow this industry, we need something to sell it into. And that is where a lot of the issues that people are suggesting they are problems at the moment. That is because the industry is not mature enough to actually someone to order 10 months in ahead. Because I'm not going to grow. So I could grow, if you come to me with a contract tomorrow to go 5,000 hectares, for 2027, I will guarantee you I will have enough seed to plant 5,000 hectares grown in Australia. Piece of pie, not a problem. But it's not like any other grain. It is difficult to store, and as everyone's noticed, there's been lots of discussion about germination. If you get this and leave it out in the sun, it'll cook, it will germinate. If it's the flower, what we've worked out is when it's flowering, if you get a bad pollination, you get bad seed set, and the germination's down, and also your vigor within the seeds. There's a lot of things going on with this, so it's not an easy plant to store and move around. And so that's what you've got to be aware of. It is a wild plant, and it does things that no other crop in Australia that I've dealt with does.
All right, thanks, Colin. Now, Drew, here's a question for you. Will there be any genetic testing for variety confidence?
Good question. Can I take that question on notice?
Oh, okay. No
Yep.
problems. Another question. Muca 76, sorry if I've said that wrong, 76 was noted as a variety for trials, but there doesn't seem to be any data on this variety in the results. Is there a reason for that? Is that for you, Mark?
That's for me. Yes, it was trialled. The results that I showed were specifically for a range of varieties that were across all sites, and it was really to look at a general look at the variability across varieties and latitudes. There is information there for Muca 76, both in the IHVT final report, so the overall report, and in the site reports for those sites where Muca was tested, but it wasn't trialled at all sites, which is why it wasn't in that other. I don't think it was trialled at all sites, put it that way, but if it was probably only one season's worth. And so for those graphs not to be so cluttered that you couldn't see anything, I've selected certain varieties to show. But yes, Mucus 76 was trialled at a number of sites, and there is data for it. And the quickest way to find that would be in the IHVT final report.
Thanks, Mark. There's a question here. I'm not sure who it's from. Under the program of research, is there any scope for a hemp fibre standard to be established that is similar to the IWTO or USDA? At the moment, all the activities are mapped out for the program of research. So it's unlikely that there's any sort of scope or budget to bring that in. Colin?
Yes, no, we are collecting samples at the moment from fibre. I took 7 different fibre samples to China to get them to visually look at it. Now we've got some people, I've got some coming in at the moment, and with Matt Labria and Buddy Deakin University, they're looking at setting up some fibre testing to actually so that we can follow the protocols that what cotton and wool have. Being a wool grower myself, I know all that. So yes, we're working on that, doing the fibre testing at the moment.
Thanks, Colin. Omid?
Thank you, Kelly and all. Very great information, as always. Congratulations on that one, Mark and the team. I just want, to add, a note in relation to many of these issues that we are dealing with. At the moment, accountability shouldn't sit only with growers and regulators. That's what is happening at the moment. And this is where, just seed suppliers carry none to very, very minimum, right? So if we want, in my opinion, to have a credible, investable hemp industry, the seed has to come with a proper auditable QA, which is traceable, provenance, varietal purity, minimum germination, clear compliance record, including THC. And that's why, just a seed certification law like OECD, which is linked to those THC certifications from the state departments or federal department for that matter. And we must have that. It's not a nice to have anymore. It shifts the responsibility back to the seed suppliers. Then it would reduce the just failure on farm. Just we don't have to just burn the crops, or it's so low germ that just we have to put it back into the ground, and that would give the government confidence that what's being planted meets at least consistent minimum standard. And that's been happening across other leading countries in Canada, Europe, and elsewhere. And I think this is something we need to push to have a bit of more accountability from seed suppliers, not only growers and regulators. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Omid. Just trying to see if there were any more sort of questions there that we haven't addressed so far.
I think John has had his hand up for a while.
John, sorry, I missed that.
You're on speaker, John. You're on mute, John.
John, we can't hear you.
John, you're on mute.
You're still on mute, John. We can't hear you.
I'll try and message him.
Okay, while we wait for John to get back online, Sarah, did you have your hand up? Did I see?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Kelly. I just had a quick question for Drew around, you mentioned the intention is to launch an industry-facing varietal selection database with a web interface. So I was just wondering where that was going to be located. Like, where will a grower or a breeder go to source that? Is it the AgriFutures website, or where will it be?
So at the moment, it will be the AgriFutures website. Where that lands at the end of the project, I am not quite sure. But initially, it will be the AgriFutures website.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mark, did you want to stop sharing so that we can see more people on the screen? And John.
Yeah, sorry, it's the new screen. I don't know where my mic was. Thanks, everyone. Great, as usual, Mark and Drew, welcome to the new team. I just want to highlight that a lot of questions about the biomass, which wasn't covered for costs in the Industrial Hemp Variety Trial, has been covered to do biomass sampling from lots of the Industrial Hemp Variety Trial sites in the last year for biomass. So they're at Melbourne Uni and they are part of the CRCP, and they are trying to do the specs or specifications as Colin and others were suggesting. So that wasn't funded by AgriFutures, but it is funded by the CRCP. I also just want to say the survey results of this webinar are not going to be published. That's a question, Kelly? And lastly, I do hope we can put some funding in the future on the soil carbon monitoring of hemp in the soil, as well as the products for life cycle analysis, and we can do some more winter crop confirmation that it's going to be a goer on 20 million hectares in southern Australia, which was all over the ABC radio last week, as a lot of you heard. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to stop you there because I want to keep us on track. This purpose of this is to talk about IHVT. I
was talking about IHT. Thanks, Kelly.
Just in relation, does anyone else have any more questions or comments? No, fantastic. All right. Well, we might be able to wrap this up a little bit early. In relation to your question with the survey, John, it was more just feedback for AgriFutures on the trial than any information we can take forth. It wasn't really something that's going to be publishable, but I will have a look and see if there's anything that I can share in relation to people's responses. Have a little bit more look in detail. Also, Bonnie's just popped in the chat just some feedback on the webinar that we can take on board. And, you know, maybe we can do things better next time. And so I just want to thank everyone for their time. Thank you very much to our presenters and everyone who's had input into today. Thanks so much. And I may see some of you at the summit in Melbourne.